They made their way through the castle like that, not stopping or speaking again until they reached the kitchens. The house elves all perked up as he pushed open the heavy wooden door, their eyes wide and eager. "Mr. Mattheo, sir," one of them squeaked, bowing low. "How can we assist you?" He had to fight back a smile. These little guys were so damn cute. "Anything and everything you've got," he said, still holding Scarlet's hand behind him. The house elves' eyes went even wider, if that was possible. "Everything, sir?" one of them squeaked in surprise. Mattheo nodded, unable to stop the grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Everything," he confirmed. "Our girl here is starving." The house elves didn't hesitate. Within seconds, they were scurrying in every direction, climbing ladders, tossing ingredients across counters, stirring pots with wooden spoons twice their size. A massive table in the center of the kitchen groaned under the weight of food appearing out of thin air. Golden croissants stacked high in baskets, platters overflowing with fruit both magical and muggle, pineapple from Scarlet's homeland included, warm buttered scones dripping with clotted cream and jam, fluffy pancakes drizzled with honey, and not a single drop of pumpkin juice to be seen. Instead, ice-cold lemonade poured into crystal glasses, the kind she actually liked. Scarlet looked overwhelmed, almost speechless, as she stared at the mountain of food laid out before her. Mattheo finally turned to her, his eyes bright with mischief and affection as he tugged her gently forward. "Go on," he said softly. "Eat everything." He didn't miss the way her eyes shimmered again, not with sadness this time, but something softer, warmer. She didn't need to be told twice. They sat down across from one another at the table, and she practically attacked the food like she'd never eaten in her life. He watched her with a fond smile, reaching out to snag a croissant for himself. "Slowly," he teased. "You're going to get sick." But his words were half-hearted at best, and they both knew it. She rolled her eyes at him, finally cracking a real smile, and pointed her fork in mock warning. "You offered me everything, Riddle," she said, using his last name the way she used to when she was being playful. "So I'm taking everything." He leaned forward slightly, resting his chin in one hand as he watched her with pure adoration. Fair enough. They ate in companionable silence for a bit, the food working its magic on both of them. He felt some of the tension he'd been carrying for weeks slowly uncoiling. Every now and then he'd reach across the table and snag scraps off her plate, and she'd swat at him with her fork. Once, almost without thinking, he reached out and wiped a smudge of honey off the corner of her mouth with the pad of his thumb. She froze just for a second, her breath catching in her throat. He didn't pull back, just kept his thumb gently brushing the soft skin of her lip as he looked into her eyes. "Still tastes like heaven," he murmured. Her cheeks flushed a deep pink, and she looked down at her plate, suddenly very interested in rearranging the last few berries with the tip of her fork. He smiled softly. God, he'd missed this. The way she blushed so easily. The little things no one else noticed. He didn't need grand gestures, didn't need fireworks or dramatic speeches. Just this. Her here, eating too much food, smiling at him when he teased her. This was enough. After a while, she finally pushed her plate away, leaning back with a satisfied sigh. "Okay," she said, patting her stomach for emphasis. "I'm officially stuffed." He snorted a laugh, pushing his own plate away. "I told you to slow down." She stuck her tongue out at him, like she used to when they were younger. He just grinned. "Cute?" She rolled her eyes again, but this time she didn't fight the smile tugging at her lips. "You're impossible," she muttered, but there was no bite in it, just affection. He reached across the table and laced his fingers with hers, giving her hand a gentle squeeze. "But you love me anyway." "I do," she smiled coyly. His heart skipped a beat. He'd missed that smile. "Good," he murmured, his thumb rubbing small circles on the back of her hand. "Because I'm not letting you go. Not ever again." She looked down at their hands, his larger, calloused one wrapped around hers, and let out a small, shaky breath. "Promise?" she whispered, glancing back up at him through her eyelashes. His eyes softened even more, the look on his face so tender it hurt. "Promise?" he said quietly, giving her hand another gentle squeeze. "Cross my heart." "Good. Because I'm yours, Mattheo Riddle." It was such a simple sentence, one he'd heard a million times before, but this time, God, it hit different. A wave of emotion crashed over him so powerful he felt like he was drowning. He had to take a deep, shaky breath before he could speak again. "And I'm yours," he rasped, voice trembling slightly. "Always have been." She seemed to understand without him having to say anything else. Her eyes softened, the blue still so deep he could have drowned in them. Slowly, so slowly, she pulled her hand away, reaching across the table to gently kiss cheek with her palm. Come here, she whispered, her fingers tracing feather-light patterns across his skin. He didn't have to be told twice. He stood up so fast his chair nearly toppled over behind him. He crossed the space between them in 2 long strides, his heart pounding so hard he swore she could probably hear it. But when he pulled her up from the chair, he was so damn careful, like she was something fragile, something precious. His hand found hers again, winding their fingers together as his other arm snaked around her waist, pulling her against his chest and holding her close. She was so goddamn small. He felt like he could hide her against him, protect her from everything. He took a minute just to breathe her in, inhaling the familiar scent of her skin and savoring the press of her body against his. It was so natural, so familiar, it was like coming home. I missed you, he murmured, his face tucked into the crook of her neck. The words were simple, but the ache behind them was so deep it felt like a physical weight on his chest. She wrapped her arms around his shoulders, her fingertips tracing feather-light patterns along the nape of his neck. I missed you too, she whispered, her breath warm against his skin. He closed his eyes, burying his face further into the crook of her shoulder as he tightened his hold on her. Every part of him was screaming to keep her close, to never let her go again, and his fingers curled against her back, holding her with an almost feral desperation. It was almost ridiculous how small she was compared to him. He'd always been taller, more solid. But now, with her in his arms, feeling her against his chest, he felt like he could crush her by accident. Like she was this tiny, beautiful, breakable thing, and he was nothing more than a clumsy, oversized idiot who'd just as likely hurt her as protect her. He tried to be gentle, so gentle, but the way his fingers shook as they grazed down her back, tracing the length of her spine, the way his heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears, it was like every emotion he'd been bottling up for weeks was suddenly about to burst out of him, and he was desperate, so damn desperate, to tell her everything without using a single word. He could practically taste all the words he wanted to say, the ones he hadn't let himself even think before now. How much he'd missed her. How much he'd needed her. How he'd been an absolute idiot for ever letting her go. But he didn't know where to start. Didn't even know if he could. So instead, he just held her tighter, breathing her in like it was the only thing keeping him sane. I don't want to mess this up again, he whispered into her neck, voice barely above a breath. Not you, not us. His arms tightened around her like he could fuse them together. Like if he just held on long enough, she'd never be able to leave. I can't lose you again. She tilted her head slightly, pressing a soft kiss just beneath his ear. You won't, she murmured, so quiet it was almost a secret. I'm not going anywhere. A breath he didn't even realize he'd been holding rushed out of his lungs. Promise, he whispered hoarsely, his fingers twisting the fabric of her shirt like he was clinging to her for dear life. She pulled back just enough to meet his eyes, her hands coming up to cup his face gently. Promise, she said softly, and he knew she meant every single word. His eyes fluttered closed as he leaned into her touch, his breath catching in his chest. God, he was going to start crying if she kept looking at him like that. It was so damn unfair how easily she could make him feel like this. Like the whole wide world could crash down around them, and he wouldn't care as long as he still had her safe and sound in his arms. His hands moved from her back to her hips, his thumbs tracing a slow circle against the bare skin just above her waistband. You drive me absolutely insane, he muttered, opening his eyes to look at her again. Her lips quirked into a small, almost mischievous smile, the kind that always made his heart skip a beat. Good, she whispered, her eyes sparkling with mischief. He huffed a laugh, his thumbs still tracing those slow circles against her hip bone. Don't you dare start getting cocky, he warned. She feigned innocence, blinking up at him with a wide-eyed look that was anything but. Me? Cocky? She said, batting her eyelashes. Never. He grinned, giving her hips a gentle squeeze as he pulled her even closer. Liar, he teased, his voice low and warm. You love driving me insane. Her cheeks flushed a darker pink, the corner of her mouth twitching like she was fighting back a smile. Well, you're just so easy to tease, she said, her eyes glinting with playful challenge. He raised an eyebrow, his thumb still tracing those same infuriatingly slow circles against her skin. Careful. Keep that up, and I might have to find a way to shut you up. Her eyes widened ever so slightly at the implication, and then, damn her, she smirked. Try me, she challenged, lifting her chin with a hint of defiance. He felt something in his chest snap, his hands gripping her hips a little tighter as he hauled her impossibly closer, his body pressing against hers from chest to thigh. "You are so bloody tempting," he growled, his eyes darkening. She let out a little gasp, barely audible over the sudden thudding of his heart, but he felt the way she shivered, the way her breath caught in her throat as he crowded against him. And gods, it was so good, feeling her shudder like that. Feeling the way her body reacted to his touch, to his voice, his proximity. He had to bite back his own groan as he leaned in, his breath hot on her ear. "Careful, love. You have no idea what I want to do to you." "Oh, I have a pretty good idea of what you want to do to me, darling." She kisses him softly, "But instead you're gonna walk me to my dorm like a perfect gentleman and kiss me goodnight." He groaned, his eyes fluttering closed as her lips met his, soft and sweet and so goddamn tempting. It took all his self-control not to press her up against the nearest wall and kiss her senseless, but he'd promised not to screw this up. So instead, he took a deep, shuddering breath as he cupped her face in his hands. "You are infuriating," he whispered, a hint of a smile on his face. "But I swear to God I'll be a perfect gentleman. Tonight." She smirked, her hands resting on his chest as she leaned up to press another soft kiss to his jaw. "You'd better," she murmured, her eyes sparkling with mischief. He rolled his eyes, trying to ignore the way it made his skin burn every time her lips touched him. "You're a menace," he said, shaking his head as he stepped back and reluctantly loosened his grip on her hips. "Come on, let's get you to your dorm before I lose my sanity completely." He offered her his arm with a mock chivalrous bow, doing his best to keep the smirk off his face as she looped her arm through his. They made their way out of the kitchens, his steps slow and measured to match hers, fighting every instinct to pick her up again and carry her all the way to her dormitory. The walk through the corridors wasn't long, but it felt like an endless goddamn torture, knowing how close she was. He could feel her body heat radiating through her arm, the familiar scent of her skin threatening to drive him crazy. Every now and then, her hand would brush against his, sending a jolt of electricity up his spine, and he could have sworn she was doing it on purpose. Just to tease him. "You know," he said suddenly, trying to keep his voice casual, "you might be the death of me, love." She raised an eyebrow, looking up at him with a faux innocent expression. "And why's that?" she asked, her voice all sweet and butter wouldn't melt. He groaned internally, knowing damn well she was playing him like a fiddle. "You know why," he said, his arm tightening around hers almost involuntarily. "You? With your teasing touches and cheeky smiles?" She laughed, the sound so damn perfect it made his heart ache. "What? I'm not allowed to touch you now?" He let out a huff, his fingers flexing against her forearm as he fought to keep his mind out of the goddamn gutter. "You're doing it on purpose," he said accusingly. "You're deliberately trying to get a rise out of me." "I just missed you," she said. He stopped walking. Right there in the middle of the corridor, he turned to face her, his expression softening as he cupped her cheek with one hand. "Yeah," he murmured. "Then let me look at you." And for once she didn't tease him or hide behind a smirk. She just let him. Let his eyes trace every detail, the faint freckles across her nose, the way her dark brown hair shimmered under torchlight, how impossibly blue those eyes were when they met his without walls between them. Gods, he'd forgotten how beautiful she was up close. Not just pretty, not just stunning, but breathtaking. Like someone carved a star out of sky and shaped it into human form. His thumb brushed across her cheekbone as he stared at her, his voice barely above a whisper. "I missed you too," he said. "More than I ever let myself admit." A soft, sad smile tugged at the corner of her lips, so quiet it was almost painful. He didn't know what possessed him in that moment. Maybe it was the way she looked up at him like he still meant something. Like he wasn't just broken pieces scattered across last year's mistakes. So slowly, so carefully, he leaned down and pressed a kiss to her forehead. Not possessive, not desperate, just tender. A promise wrapped in warmth and breath. "You matter." For a few seconds, everything else faded away. The corridor, the stone walls, the torchlight. There was just her. The soft press of her forehead against his lips, and the way her lashes fluttered shut. He let his eyes close too. Just breathed her in, reveling in the fact that he was allowed to do this again. That she was close enough to touch. That her heart was beating so damn close to his. She put her arms around him, embracing him tightly. "I missed this." The words were muffled as she leaned her head into his chest. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her tight against him. Her head tucked neatly under his chin, her body fitting against his like she was made for him. "Me too," he whispered, burying his face in her hair as he inhaled deeply. God, she smelled so damn good. He was never letting go. They stood like that for a long moment, just holding each other, breathing each other in, the rest of the castle quiet around them. It was the best damn feeling in the world. Like something inside his chest was finally shifting back into place. But then, reluctantly, he pulled back slightly, just enough to look down at her. "We should probably keep moving," he said, his hands still lingering on her hips. She nodded, her expression soft as she looked up at him. "Probably," she agreed. But neither of them made any move to start walking again. Instead, he just stood there, his thumbs tracing slow circles against her hips, his fingers itching to pull her closer, his chest so damn tight with all the things he still hadn't said. "We should really go," he repeated half-heartedly, his fingers still lingering on the dip of her hip. His body was practically screaming at him to grab on tighter, to pull her flush against him and kiss her senseless. But he forced himself to hold back, to be a goddamn gentleman, even though his every instinct was telling him to lose control around her. She bit her lip, her fingers toying idly with the fabric of his shirt. It was a small movement, but he couldn't help the way it made his breath catch in his chest. He was so goddamn screwed. How was he supposed to keep his hands to himself when she was standing right here, looking up at him like that? He knew she could see the conflict in his eyes, the battle between his head and his heart, the part of him that wanted to do the right thing and the part that wanted to throw caution to the wind and kiss her stupid. His fingers flexed against her hips, his voice hoarse as he spoke. You're making this goddamn impossible, love," he said, his eyes darkening as he looked at her. She smiled, slow and deliberate, the kind of smile that always made his stomach drop. And then she did it. She leaned up on her toes, pressing a soft to the corner of his mouth before pulling back with an innocent blink. "Oops," she murmured. "My bad." He stared at her in disbelief for a second, before letting out a groan so loud it probably echoed down the corridor. "You're gonna be the death of me." She giggles and grabs his hand. "Come on, my love, it's getting late." He huffed a laugh, letting her tug him along as he shook his head in mock exasperation. "Only you," he muttered, lacing their fingers together and squeezing her hand. "Only you could tease me half to death and then act like an angel." She glanced over her shoulder at him with that same glint in her eye. Yeah, she had him completely and utterly wrapped around her finger. They continued on like that, walking side by side down the quiet corridors, his fingers curled around hers, his heart pounding against his ribcage every time she smiled or glanced up at him. He wanted to pull her into every empty classroom and kiss her senseless. He wanted to pin her against the wall and kiss her until they both forgot how to breathe. But he had promised himself that he'd be a goddamn gentleman. For now. "You know," he said quietly as they turned the final corner toward the Ravenclaw common room, his voice low and warm. "I'm going to make it up to you." She looked up at him, her blue eyes curious in the dim torchlight. "Every day," he continued, squeezing her hand gently, "I'm going to prove that I'm worth your trust, that I'm worth you." Her expression softened as she looked up at him, the corner of her mouth tugging up. "Yeah," she whispered, stopping a few steps away from the door to the Ravenclaw common room. "And how exactly are you going to do that?" He drew her a step closer, his voice dropping to a whisper as his thumb brushed across her knuckles. "You'll see." His eyes darkened as he looked down at her. God, she was going to be the death of him. Just the thought of all the things he wanted to do to her was making his blood run hot. The way he'd kiss her, touch her, up for every goddamn month apart. The way he'd take his time. Every inch of her skin under his hands and his tongue mapping out every dip and curve, the way he'd memorize star charts and spells. He took a shaky breath, trying to tamp down the hunger that was clawing inside him. "But for tonight," he whispered, "you'll just have to trust me." Her eyes held his deep, knowing, and then she smiled, slow, warm. "I already do," she said softly. His heart damn near stopped again. She trusted him. After everything, after he'd hurt her, lost her, and then somehow gotten her back, she looked at him like she completely trusted him. "You're too damn good for me," he whispered, his fingers curling tighter around hers. "You know that?" "I know," she teases. "But I just love you so damn much." That almost undid him. He took another deep breath, trying to keep his grip on his self-control as he looked down at her, voice rough. "God damn it, love. Don't say that. I'm trying my best to be a gentleman here and not kiss you senseless right now. Kiss me senseless and then be a gentleman." He let out a helpless, half-groan, half-laugh as he backed her up against the stone wall beside the Ravenclaw common room door. You're impossible, he said, one hand coming up to brace against the wall beside her head, his body suddenly so close. You're actually going to kill me at this rate, you know, or bring you back to life. His breath caught as he stared down at her, his heart slamming against his rib cage. The way she had of looking at him, so damn beautiful, so damn strong. Every ounce of his self-control was screaming at him to pull back, to keep his promise, to be the goddamn gentleman he'd sworn he would be tonight, but he was only a man. And she was driving him insane. So slowly, his eyes locked on hers. He leaned in, his hand still braced beside her head, his body her against the wall with heat and promise. Then let me bring you back to life first, he murmured, his voice low and rough as sin. And just before his lips met hers, consider this your resurrection kiss. He didn't give her time to respond. His mouth crashed down on hers, desperate, starving, like he was a man drowning and she was the only breath left in the world. One hand tangled into her hair, holding her exactly where he wanted her as his lips moved over hers with feverish need. Every touch was a promise. Every stroke of his tongue against hers a vow. He kissed her like he'd spent months learning every word of regret by heart and now had finally found the courage to say them out loud. Not in apologies, but in passion. I remember you. I ache for you. You're mine. Again. And when she moaned into his mouth, soft and breathless, he nearly lost it completely. His grip tightened in her hair, his other hand sliding down to her waist to pull her even closer, until there wasn't an inch of space between them. He kissed her deeper, slower now, like he had all the time in the world, like he was reclaiming every second they'd lost. Her hands were on his chest at first, then slowly creeping up to tangle into his hair just as fiercely as he held onto her. She was kissing him back with just as much hunger, just as much fire. And gods, it was exactly what he'd missed. Exactly what he dreamed of when sleep wouldn't come and silence felt like punishment. He felt almost drunk on the taste of her, the soft warmth of her tongue against his, the way she moaned into his mouth when he kissed her just right. It would be so easy to do this all night, to pull her into an empty classroom and lose himself in the feel of her skin under his hands, in her breathlessness when he kissed a path down her neck. He still remembered where the sensitive spots on her skin were. He still knew what she liked. And right now, all he wanted was more. His lips moved down her neck to that spot right under her jaw, the one that made her shudder and gasp and arch into him. Yeah, he definitely remembered. His thumb pressed into the small of her spine as he rocked against her, the sound of her soft whimper sending fire straight to his groin. He couldn't stop. Didn't want to stop. Every touch, every taste, every low sound was a reminder of what he'd been missing. He nipped gently at her earlobe, his voice rough against her ear. Do you have any goddamn idea what you do to me? He whispered, his hands roaming lower down her hips, his fingers gripping a little too hard. How I'm trying to keep it together and be a gentleman right now. But I'm this close to just snapping and doing all the dirty things I've been imagining for months. Her laugh, sharp and hot, cut through the tension, and he couldn't help the low growl that vibrated in his chest as he pressed himself even closer, his hips pinning hers in place. You think you're not killing me? She breathed, her voice almost a moan when he rocked against her again. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, biting at the soft place under her jaw where he knew her pulse would be racing. You're a goddamn tease, you know that? He breathed against her skin. I've had dreams about you every damn night for months. Another slow, deliberate roll of his hips had her gasping, her head falling back just slightly to expose the long line of her throat. He took full advantage of the position, his lips and teeth grazing along the sensitive skin there. His voice was a rough whisper. You're still so goddamn responsive, so sensitive, so perfectly mine. She arched into him, her hands clutching at his shoulders as a breathy whimper slipped past her lips. Gods, you're going to be the death of me, he groaned into her neck, his hips rolling against hers again with a slow, torturous grind. You're not supposed to make it this hard, he whispered, voice ragged. I promised myself I'd go slow, be good. He pulled back slightly, just enough to look down at her, her lips swollen from his kisses, cheeks flushed and eyes half-lidded with desire. But you do things to me, he said hoarsely, things I can't control. His hands roved over her body, fingers tracing the curves of her hips, the dip of her waist, the softness of her thighs. You drive me crazy, he murmured, his mouth leaving a trail of slow, hot kisses down her neck. You have no idea how goddamn obsessed I am with you, love. He nipped at her pulse point, drinking in the way she gasped. I've been waiting months to touch you like this. Months to hear you breathe my name. And now that I have you back." He pulled back just enough to look into her eyes, his breathing ragged, his hands still gripping her hips like he was afraid she'd vanish if he let go. "Now that I have you back," he repeated, voice rough and low. "I'm not letting go again." His thumb brushed over the sharp bone of her hip as he leaned in closer, his lips hovering just above hers. "You're mine," he whispered, "and I will spend every damn day proving that to you." As she gently places the palm of her hand on his cheek and looks into his eyes, really looks. "I know you will." Then, after a beat, "We're meant to be, you and I. We were made to love each other." He leaned into her touch, closing his eyes and letting out a shuddery breath. The things she could do to him with just a few words, it was ridiculous. It was dangerous. But it was true. "Damn right we are," he murmured, turning his head slightly to kiss her palm. "I'd love you in every damned lifetime." He stayed like that for a long moment, forehead resting against hers, her hands still cupping his cheek, both of them breathing each other in. Then slowly, so slowly, he pulled back just enough to look down at her, his eyes dark with emotion and something deeper. Something eternal. "You're going to be my forever," he whispered. "I don't care how many lifetimes it takes. I'm not losing you again." Her eyes were shining up at him through her lashes, her breath coming in shallow gasps. He knew what she was thinking, feeling, the same thing he was. 100 years from now, 1,000, 1,000,000, it didn't matter. He'd love her in every damn one. His hands moved to her face, thumb gently skimming over her flushed cheeks and swollen lips. She was so damn beautiful like this, eyes wide and full-blown with desire, cheeks pink and panting, lips parted like she was just begging to be kissed all over again. She was made for him. The thought sent another spark of fire down his spine. And he had to fight everything in him not to press her back against the wall and take her damn right there. Patience, he reminded himself roughly. He needed to go slow. He'd promised to be a goddamn gentleman. So even though the fire inside him burned hotter than fiend fire, he forced himself to take a step back, his hands reluctantly dropping from her hips to his sides. "Come on," he said, voice rougher than he meant it to be. "I better get you back to your common room before I do something stupid." Her breath was still coming in shaky gasps, her eyes fixed on his like she was as addicted to him as he was to her. He could see the desire and the need in her gaze, and it took every shred of self-control he had not to close the distance between them. "Before I break my promise," he whispered, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. "Before I press you against this wall, lift you up and do all those dirty things that have been driving me insane." He could see the same mix of desire and self-control mirrored in her expression. He wanted her so damn badly it hurt in the way she was looking at him. He knew she felt the same way. But he also knew she wasn't ready for more yet, and gods, as much as he wanted to throw all his damn promises out the window, he didn't break his word. So he forced himself to give her a crooked smile, his eyes still dark with want as he offered her a hand. "Come on, love. Let me escort you back." She hesitated for a moment, her eyes darting between his hand and his face, like she still wanted more, but knew it was time to stop for now. That small flicker of hesitation nearly undid him, and he had to bite back a groan. But then slowly, her hand slid into his, her fingers wrapping around his own. He held her hand like a lifeline, lacing their fingers together, trying to ignore the little jolt of heat that shot down his spine at the contact. "You're gonna be the death of me, love." He stopped by the door, turning to face her, his hands still holding hers, his eyes locked on hers. The desire was still there, a low, aching heat just below the surface, but he kept a rein on it. "I should let you go," he said softly, his thumb tracing rough circles on the back of her hand. "If I stay, I'm afraid I'll stop being a gentleman." Her fingers curled around his a little tighter at that, like she was fighting the same internal battle. She looked up at him with those big, beautiful eyes, her cheeks still flushed and her hair a rumpled mess from his hands. Gods, she was beautiful. His self-control was hanging on by a damn thread. His grip tightened on hers, and he had to fight back a groan. Everything in him was screaming at him to pull her closer, to press her back into the shadows and kiss her senseless. But he'd promised her he'd be a goddamn gentleman, which meant the only thing he could let himself do was lift her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss against her knuckles. "I'll see you tomorrow," he murmured, his eyes still locked on hers. She nodded slowly, her lips parting slightly like she wanted to say something, but no words came. He took that as his cue. With one last lingering look, his eyes burning with want and promise, he finally let go of her hand and took a step back. "Good night, love,"